Now for a very brief Devar Torah, and yes, I'm back. For those who didn't realize that I'm back. Um, what? Just making sure, and you're all witnesses to the fact that they let me back in the country by mistake. But this week's Parsha, Shoftim, an amazing thing. This week's Parsha, Sefer Devarim was the most quoted book at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. And of the parts of Shoftim, of Devarim that was quoted, this week's Parsha happened to be the prime thing to quote because of two factors. One was about judges and how to interpret the law. And the second was the king. How to choose a king. The king had to be chosen from among your brethren. The king you chose the king after the land was conquered, so he had nothing to do with the conquering of the land. So it's very interesting, that side aspect. The king could not have too many wives, too many horses, and too much gold. The issue about wives, that was the way you signed a peace treaty in the ancient world, was you gave your daughter as a guarantee. You're limiting the king's powers to make in foreign affairs. With horses, don't think of horses as just something to ride on. The chariot was the tank of the ancient world. In order to have a chariot, you need horses. You're limiting the military. The king cannot have a large military. Lastly, too much gold. Remember, the king makes his money by being king. He cannot use the office of being king to make money. He needs to be able to collect money, the taxes, to run the country, but not for himself, not for his own glory. Very interesting that they took these ideas from Sefer Devarim and they applied it. If you ever look in the American Constitution, the president has to be a natural-born citizen. His powers are very limited, just as Israelite king powers were limited. And the same thing, by the way, the king had to write a Sefer Torah. He had to know what the basis of the law is. And so it's very interesting that the founding fathers of this country chose this to put the limitations on the president. That the president is not a king as there were kings in the ancient, even in the modern world, in the 18th century. A little note that when King George III found out that Washington chose not to become king after the American Revolution in 1783, his response was, "If this be so, he is the greatest man alive," because he knew what Washington was giving up. Something to think about, Kaddish Rabbanim.